forces, independently of ideology or other political differences, around a common commitment to peace and peace through development. The IPC was founded over 114 weeks ago at the initiative of the Schiller Institute's founder, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. And she will be the first to address this meeting today, which occurs at a very dangerous and very also moment of great potential. Today is August the 8th. It's 80 years since the August 6th bombing of Hiroshima, the August 9th bombing of Nagasaki, and we meet today under the theme of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, never again. We have issued a call, Helga Zepp-LaRouche has personally written and issued a call for an urgent meeting of the presidents of Russia, China, and the United States to meet at the soonest possible opportunity to take up the pressing issues which otherwise threaten the planet at this point. So with that in mind, with the urgency of the moment as well as the potential, let me turn the floor over to Helga Zepp-LaRouche for her opening remarks.
Hello to all of you. As Dennis just said, we have today the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Nagasaki. And, you know, there are many comments around the world on that day, some, you know, with a clear worry and actually concern and anxiety that we are not safe from experiencing again the use of nuclear weapons. As a matter of fact, that there are many people who are acutely aware that the world has never been so close to nuclear extinction like today, in a situation where all the mechanisms which prevented a disaster during the Cuban Missile Crisis are no longer there. And we are experiencing the disintegration of the old order, and the new order is not yet in place. As a matter of fact, it's not there. So I think that fact that Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened, and you know, as we have done our own studies many years ago, it was not necessary, if you even can say that, concerning the use of nuclear weapons, because the Japanese Emperor Hirohito was already in a process of negotiation with forces from the Vatican about surrender. So, you know, it is now very clear that that bomb was, the order to throw that bomb was given by Truman, not because it was necessary to save 1 million lives of American soldiers, as the official line goes, but more as a demonstration of Schrecklichkeit, as the beginning of the Cold War against the Soviet Union. That part of history has urgently to be, you know, worked through, and historians are called upon to finally, you know, straighten the record on that matter, because we are so close to a similar and even much, much worse fate of all of humanity. Now, we are in a traumatic situation, you know, daily the picture seems to shift. A couple of days ago, it looked almost hopeless. Then, in a big surprise, which we should almost expect these days, President Trump did signal that he is willing to meet Putin. This was after the meeting of his representative Witkoff, meeting for 3 hours in the Kremlin. It seems now that that meeting could take place in 3 days from now, on August 11th, maybe in the Emirates, maybe in some other neutral country, so to speak, which is not subject to the ICC ruling because of the arrest order against President Putin. But if that meeting takes place, it obviously would be the absolute necessary signal that, you know, the worst catastrophe in Ukraine can be avoided. There are also signs that Zelensky has said that, he also thinks this war has to come to an end. And it is mooted that there could be a meeting between Trump, Putin, and Zelensky afterwards. Now, that is obviously only one part of the strategic picture. The other one is naturally the unbelievable escalation of what can only be called genocide and what is being called genocide now out of Israel from a broad spectrum of forces, the genocide in Gaza. Now, yesterday evening, the war cabinet of Netanyahu approved that the operation in Gaza will be expanded, not the entire Gaza as Netanyahu had demanded, but only in, quote, Gaza City. And I must say that there is now a growing awareness of what is actually happening. It took much too long, but now in the alternative media in Germany, there has appeared a documentation which is quite breathtaking, where a person with the name of Willy Wahl put up comparison between step by step what was said by the different members of the cabinet of and defense forces in Israel in respect to Gaza, comparing it to what Reinhard Heydrich, the chief of the SS in Nazi Germany on the 20th of October 1941, wrote to Heinrich Himmler about how Warsaw and Leningrad must be attacked much more brutally because the destruction of these two cities would be insufficient so far. Therefore, there should be a use of fire bombs and explosives because these cities had to be exterminated. And all of this is documented very well in the Nuremberg Tribunal, which brought to justice at least some of the main criminals. And this is being then compared step by step with pictures from the Warsaw ghetto, from Leningrad, with the pictures from Gaza. And all of this is prefaced with a picture of the Michelangelo fresco in the Sixtine Chapel about the final judgment, implying that that many of the forces which are condoning this genocide eventually will be brought to justice. Now, this is for normal, people, what they call heavy stuff. But I think it is what is determining the picture. And I think that goes also for the situation, people who are condoning the warmongering, which can only lead to a catastrophe of all of humanity. Now, this is extremely dramatic. And, I mean, President Trump is very difficult to read these days. He made this sudden move, and hopefully this summit will take place. At the same time, President Xi Jinping just telephoned with President Putin. Obviously, this is a matter of strategic concern for every head of government. But another action which Trump is doing is having also potentially gigantic effects, namely that he did go ahead by imposing these tariffs against 70 countries of the planet, the EU, Switzerland, anywhere from 10 to 50%. All the BRICS countries and many more have been affected. This is now meeting massive resistance. President Lula from Brazil is not backing down. He is now in contact with Prime Minister Modi. And the BRICS countries are coordinating their action, and involuntarily Trump may actually trigger by doing that exactly what he claims he wants to prevent, namely the de-dollarization, because he forces the countries of the global south into a joint action, and that may actually lead to things, which Trump has not intended. There are many other things one could discuss, and maybe we get to it in the discussion. For example, there is a quite incredible report in Le Monde, which reports that that there was massive pressure from the United States, Israel, Great Britain, and Germany harassing the chief prosecutor of the ICC, Karim Ahmad Khan, by trying to prevent him or take back, arrest orders against Netanyahu. I mean, all of this signifies that there is a breakdown of any rules, that any treaty, any arrangement, a disarmament treaty, Helsinki Accord, all of these things have basically gone into disarray. They don't exist anymore. And this is why I issued this call, an appeal to the three presidents of the United States, China, and Russia, that they must make a step. And, the most obvious place would be the upcoming 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in the Pacific. And on September 3rd, there will be a big military parade on Tiananmen Square, where President Putin already has agreed to attend. And, obviously, if President Xi Jinping would invite President Trump to attend, that would be the appropriate setting, commemorating the fact that China also lost millions and millions of people in the Second World War, a fact which has been almost forgotten in the history account. But it is a fact, that, by basically fighting against Japanese militarism, China played a very important role in bringing about the result of World War II. And to make a solemn, renewed commitment, never again war, never again fascism, if these three presidents would meet at such a historic occasion, they could indeed agree to settle all of these problems I touched upon before by diplomacy and by actually starting a new era for all of mankind by cooperation, because the only way how we will get out of this crisis is that we convince the countries of the West that we have to cooperate with the global South, with the global majority, and then everything will become relatively easy. So that is some of the subjects we should discuss, and we should absolutely mobilize, because, the danger of the world going into a final catastrophe has never been more clear than just now.
Okay, thank you, Helga, for those opening remarks. And we want to welcome everybody again to meeting number 114 of the International Peace Coalition. And before I introduce Mr. Ray McGovern, who of course speaks with us here often, I just want to recall to people something which we can make available in the chat later. It's simply a paragraph from 1946 from the United States Strategic Bombing Survey of July 1st. So I'm quoting verbatim. Based on a detailed investigation of all of the facts and supported by the testimony of the surviving Japanese leaders involved, it is the survey's opinion that certainly prior to the 31st of December 1945, and in all probability prior to the 1st of November of 1945, Japan would have surrendered even if the atomic bombs had not been dropped, even if Russia had not entered the war, and even if no invasion had been planned or contemplated. A little later, we may refer to Dwight Eisenhower's remarks concerning the dropping of the bomb, which he opposed at the time prior to its being dropped. But I wanted to refer to that because whatever one might say about the fog of war of 1945-46, why it is not the case that Americans in general know that the United States Strategic Bombing Survey stated officially in 1946 that there was no basis for the atomic bomb to be dropped with respect to the surrender of Japan. Why that's not known now is exactly why we find ourselves making comparisons, and I will argue this comparison a little bit later, of Hiroshima and Gaza. Ray McGovern, who for 27 years, a veteran from the Central Intelligence Agency and has briefed presidents, and has been fighting since particularly 2003 through his co-creation of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, because of the debacle of the Iraq War of 2003, is with us today. We're always happy to have him. Ray, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dennis. Can I be heard?
Yes, you can.
I can. Okay. Well, I want to thank Helga for setting the stage. Helga, you're a hard act to follow, but I think I can pick up on some of your main points. The first thing I'd like to do is say that there's good news as well as bad news. This session here, or this group, has heard me say very often that President Putin has placed fundamental priority in international relations on creating a decent relationship with the United States. This has been the overweening objective by the Russians. Now, this is hard to believe, but if you look at the actions, that you look at his caution and his perspicaciousness, well, and if you look at what he told Witkoff just 2 days ago, you could see that this is true. Not only that, most people have missed this. Trump derangement syndrome is still very much in favor or in operation. Most people have seen the readout from, well, a lot of people have seen the readout from what Putin said yesterday with respect to the summit, and what Ushakov, his right-hand person for these matters, said. Now, in the very first paragraph, what Ushakov said, and I think this is really important, okay? That's why he put it in the very first paragraph. Here it is. The meeting, that is the meeting between Witkoff and Putin, 3 hours long, was businesslike, quite constructive, focused on Ukraine. Now, please take a note here. The next sentence says, once again, it was noted that Russia-US relations could be placed on a totally different, mutually beneficial footing, which would be in stark contrast with the way these relations have evolved in recent years, end quote. So there's a fundamental staging here of interest. Putin wants to end the thing in Ukraine without unconditional surrender by anybody. He wants a deal where his core interests, that is the core interests of the United States, will be respected, taken into account, a buffer zone created, and now he sees this fellow Trump sending Witkoff abruptly to the Kremlin. Now, Witkoff is about 10 times smarter, in my view, than Marco Rubio, and I hate to damn with faint praise, but that's how the Russians look at him. That's why Putin looked at him. That's why Putin met with him 5 times now, okay? So what does Witkoff say? Oh my God, look, don't say anything about this, but Trump has backed himself into an awful corner here. These bone-crushing sanctions. I mean, he's got a lot of pressure. He don't want to do that stuff, especially not with respect to Russia. He wants to do something on Ukraine. Every speech he makes, Mr. Putin, says Witkoff, every speech he makes, he says, look, this is not my war, okay? As a matter of fact, Putin himself 3 days ago said, "Это война Байдена." That's Russian for война. Война и мир is war and peace, right? It's the war of Biden, okay? And then the next thing Trump always says, I want to stop the killing. I want to sotto voce take respect for having stopped the killing. So enter Witkoff. oh my God. My president's back into a corner. He doesn't want to do these sanctions. I know tomorrow's or 2 days from now is the deadline. For God's sake, he's embarrassed, but he needs somebody to help him. Okay, now we need a summit that would divert attention. Please, could you do a summit? And Putin says, "Huh? I'm supposed to bail out." Well, look, this is what Trump will do in return for that. Blah 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 blah. Okay, 3 hours. Okay. So before Witkoff is back in the States, Trump announced, "Oh, we had a summit going. Oh man, this is going to be good. All right." And what we're going to do really is talk about Ukraine, and maybe Zelensky will take part in a second summit, just the three of us. Well, that's not going to happen. And Ushakov says that. Ushakov says, look, with respect to a trilateral meeting, now this is the readout, right? This is what we go to as Russian analysts. With respect to the trilateral meeting, there was no specific discussion on this topic. Oh, with Witkoff. Russia has not commented on this option in any way. Our suggestion primarily is to focus on preparing for a bilateral meeting with Donald Trump. That's the best way to get success here. And, how long it's going to take to prepare this might take a little longer, but it looks like they're trying manfully to get one next week. So what's the upshot of all this? Well, Putin has plucked Trump's coals out of the fire, okay? Trump can now divert attention from all these bone-crushing sanctions and all that kind of stuff and listen to Witkoff, who is telling him, look, don't listen to Lindsey Graham, for God's sake. You're strong enough. You're strong enough to stand up to him. And Trump, out of desperation, got Putin to help him. Why? Because Putin puts fundamental priority on working out a decent relationship with Trump. Whether Trump does or not, I think he does, but that evidence is less clear. In other words, he's sure that he wanted to get Putin to help him here, and Putin did. Now, what about the sanctions? I don't see any word about, today's the deadline. Oh my God. No, anyhow. Now, the other thing is it's a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing. We're talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because of these later developments, which show that there is this priority being put by Putin on relations with the United States, there's much less danger, in my view, of nuclear war in Europe. That despite these crazies like General Donahue, who's threatening and says we have plans to attack Kaliningrad, an integral part of Russia. Despite all that, I think Trump and Witkoff can bring their military to heel. At least I hope so. I hope that Donahue is told to shut up. Okay. Now, what else was I going to say? Oh well, the Mr. Hyde stuff is Israel. Suffices to say that Trump is over a barrel. It's not only, in my view, the Israel lobby and the money and the close relationship with Netanyahu and trying to save Netanyahu from his government falling and ending up in jail. It's also got a pencil and a paper, blackmail. Now, there are a lot of people who know more about Israel and Netanyahu than I do, so I've consulted with them, okay? They think, and they agree with me, there's more than an even chance that Netanyahu has Epstein-type blackmail on our president. And that may account in large measure for his unconscionable support for forced starvation and genocide, okay? Now, if that's true, that's heinousness squared, okay? Words fail. In other words, the situation in the Middle East is much more labil, as the Germans would say, much more delicate. Now, I'll just finish off by saying this matters. This matters in a nuclear context because Israel has nuclear weapons, for God's sake, okay? Now, let's just say that the US and Israel attack Iran again. Now, Iran is quite well able to defend itself, especially with new Russian and Chinese weaponry. And so let's say Netanyahu gets in extremis, as we say. Will he use his nuclear weapons? This is a guy who does genocide, forced starvation. Tell me that he's not going to use nuclear weapons in the last resort. I think he would. So that's where the most danger is. That's where we have to put the most pressure on, not so much on Ukraine. That's going to work itself out, in my view. But on the Middle East, we have a real potential for the use of nuclear weapons, and those would be Israeli nuclear weapons. And we have to make sure that Trump and all his associates there in Congress know that this time we will not support Netanyahu. I'm sorry if I went a little bit long here, but those are my thoughts in a broader perspective. And I look forward very much to hearing the rest of these panelists. Thanks very much for having me on.
Well, thank you very much, Ray, for being with us. And we're going to go right to our next panelist, who is Anthony Aguilar. Now, before Mr. Aguilar speaks, I just want to point out that some of us have been out on the streets saying that Gaza is the new Hiroshima. Some people have objected to that because they say, well, the scale is just completely different. Well, what's the same is that actually both of these are not things that were actually necessary. More importantly, these are, and in the case of Gaza, where, as Ray just pointed out, you have a nuclear threat in addition, you've got witnesses to a process of mass murder and genocide, including Americans like Anthony Aguilar, who is not an activist, but is a soldier. I'll use portions of what Tucker Carlson said when he introduced him. He said, so you're a retired lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. You went to West Point. You got your commission in the Army straight out of West Point. You served for 25 years in the U.S. Army as a combat infantry officer and a Special Forces, a Green Beret officer. You were deployed 12 times to Iraq, 3 times Afghanistan. You were deployed to Syria, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Jordan, the Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. You saw combat in many of those venues. You're highly decorated, wounded in combat, received a Purple Heart. You got a Bronze Star for valor in combat. All right, so now I go through that because Anthony Aguilar, with whom I've spoken a couple of times, is the man who knew too much. He is an American who never intended to be given the role that he's been given and denounced in the way he's been denounced. I think this is important just to say, as he comes here to speak to us today, we're happy to have you. Please go ahead. We may take a few questions from you also, sir, but please go ahead and state your case. You've got a fairly large audience, which is growing right now. I know we're well over 500 people viewing at the moment. So you have the floor.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on this platform. I think a lot of important discussion happening today. So basically, from what my experience was, I was hired as an independent security contractor for UG Solutions, which is a subcontract under a greater contract called Safe Reach Solutions, which is the for-profit contract mechanism under what many have heard as the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. So the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is kind of the umbrella organization, but the organizations, the companies that are actually executing this humanitarian assistance, humanitarian aid in Gaza are absolutely for-profit contract companies. They are there making money. So I've said it on many platforms in terms of what I've witnessed in terms of war crimes, and I get a lot of pushback from people saying, well, that what you've described aren't war crimes. Well, what I've described are exactly war crimes. I don't prescribe to war crimes being just because it's on the news and you see someone beheading somebody or somebody doing something grotesque, which those are certainly war crimes. I call them war crimes based on what is prescribed and directed in the international humanitarian law, codified further therein by the protocols of the Geneva Convention, further codified in the laws of armed conflict, And all of these are things that the United States is signatory to, along with Israel. I want to remind everybody, Israel is also signatory to these things. So within Gaza, you have is there a threat in Gaza? The threat of Hamas, the threat of an enemy? There absolutely is. I have never discredited or discounted that. However, there's also a very large, unarmed civilian population that is starving. And they are on the brink of famine if they haven't already crossed into what, could be described as famine. That is a fact. And anybody that says that there isn't mass starvation or there isn't starving people in Gaza, that is irresponsible rhetoric, and that should be condemned. There is starvation. War crimes that are being committed when you have Israeli Defense Force soldiers and you have UG Solutions, American contractors who, mind you, are in the country on a tourist visa, who are firing at the crowd to control their movement or firing at the crowd to keep them back from a certain area. I mean, that's just one example. Simply that firing live ammunition, targeting at an unarmed population for the means of controlling them is a war crime. So what all this has shown me, having been there, having been on the ground in Gaza, is that it seems to me that there's an active effort, an active campaign, if you will, to dehumanize the population, to label the entire population as the enemy, and then to further dehumanize the population through putting them in a position where they're literally begging for food. We've set up these distribution sites in areas that, in order to reach them, the Palestinians have to travel many kilometers to get there. And when they do get there, it is a mass free-for-all fight for survival, if you will, to get food on these locations, which further dehumanizes the population. My fear is that, based on the current information that's available, the proposal that Netanyahu is putting forth to go and reoccupy or occupy the entirety of Gaza, once again, is one, for the interest of the United States. We are complicit in that. They are using American weapons. They are using American bombs. Taxpayers' dollars are going into an American contract entity, an American contract mechanism that is making money. U.S. tax dollars going to a company that is making money to be a part of this displacement, if you will, this forced displacement, the putting Palestinians in danger, regardless of the politics or the beliefs or the opinions aside. It is a fact that the distribution sites, the secure distribution sites where humanitarian aid is delivered and distributed in Gaza, are built in the engagement areas of active combat zones. That's a fact. I've been there and I've seen them. They are, which in and of itself inherently puts a civilian population at great risk. Just in that piece alone, it should be condemned. And the United States is absolutely complicit in that. If Israel goes into a full occupation of Gaza, it will not be in Israel's best interests. It will not be in the world's best interests. To occupy Gaza, to try to achieve a military defeat of Hamas is a fool's errand. Hamas will not be militarily defeated. They've been militarily weakened. Their leadership has been devastated. Now is the time for political and diplomatic end state, not military means. We have learned these lessons as a country. Afghanistan, Iraq, the Southern Philippines. I've been deployed to the Southern Philippines in the fight against the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and we've been there since the 50s, since the days of General Pershing, and we've learned that a military defeat of an organization of this nature is not going to achieve success. The full occupation of Gaza is only going to lead to much more death of a civilian population. It's going to pull Israel into a quagmire of a conflict that will have no end, that is going to drag its allies into it with it, of which the United States is one. So looking at it I look at it through three different bins, if you will. Humanitarian rights, humanitarian law, Geneva Convention, international laws and treaties that the United States agrees to that we hold as our values. We are violating those in Gaza every day, and we're being the tail wagging the dog, if you will, in terms of going along with whatever our ally says that we should do, rather than standing up to our not standing up to our ally, but standing with our ally to hold accountable for what is right. Because in the end, this is only going to severely damage Israel's position and credibility on the world stage. Two, the aspect of perception that U.S. citizens are in Gaza armed with fully automatic weapons, stun grenades, shotguns, machine guns, tear gas, used against an unarmed civilian population, mind you, that is starving, that comes to these sites to get food. The unarmed population isn't coming to these sites to protest or coming to these sites to try to incite an attack. They're coming to the sites because we're inviting them to come to these sites with food that they need to survive. And then they're getting in return, they're getting treated as if they were animals, as if they are subhuman. So there's the aspect of the United States presence on the world stage and in our American values. And my message in spreading what I've seen in Gaza, the truth that I've seen in Gaza, is not to shame or belittle or to criticize or blame. That's on the world community. What my position in this is to bring forth the truth so that the American people and the world have an honest assessment of what's going on. And I think anyone can agree that with the amount of secrecy in Gaza, no foreign press, no press can go in, no foreign entity or anybody that may speak out against the IDF or Israel. And when I think about the secrecy and the hiding of the truth and the doublespeak and the language of no one's being shot and no one's starving, and then when you show ample evidence to the contrary, then the narrative turns to, okay, well, some people are starving and some people are being shot, but Hamas is bad, which you create these red herring arguments. So when you think secrecy, red herring arguments, deflecting blame, there's other countries in the world that do that. North Korea. Is that the lineup that we want to be with in terms of how we engage in the world and how we prosecute conflicts and wars? I don't think so. So the third piece I'll look forward that I look to in terms of Israel, an ally, and their position in the world. If they continue down this path to where it is evident to the world that it is starvation. It is evident to the world that it's systematic and it's done intentionally. If Israel does not change the approach and what they're doing to include not going forth with a full-scale invasion of Gaza, if they continue on this path, this trajectory, they're only going to harm their position on the world stage. They will lose allies and supporters, and they will make themselves more of a target and isolate themselves to where they will not have support in the future. And again, I always make an attempt to take in all perspectives, everyone's view, why someone thinks the way that they do. I did not lose a close family member or a fellow citizen on October 7th. So it would be unfair of me to say, well, this is how an Israeli or the IDF should feel. That would be unfair of me to say that. However, regardless of the justification of a war, regardless of the justification of the reasoning to take action against a perceived enemy, there are values and guidelines and rules and laws and treaties that dictate and establish how that should be done, that maintain responsibility and accountability in our world. It's what we've been doing for hundreds of years. And from what I have witnessed, just looking at the facts as they are, there are war crimes being committed in Gaza. There are crimes against humanity being committed in Gaza. If that's being done intentionally or just through the mission creep and the fog and friction of war, I don't know. But I invite the world to investigate and to look at that, because I've said this before and I'll say it again in ending here. A day of atonement, a day of judgment, a day of reckoning is coming. More and more of the world are waking up to what's going on in Gaza cannot be ignored. The months and months and months and months and months of oh, there's no starvation, oh, there's no mass killing, oh, women and children aren't dying, that's all made up. That rhetoric has been exposed. And a day of reckoning is coming where the world is starting to take a hard look. And when that, I kind of, it's like a box. And when that, call it, when that box is opened, and we look in there and we see what's truly going on, the world is going to demand accountability. Now is the time, not next week, not next year, not after. Now is the time for the United States to stand and hold accountable our ally, because if we do not, the world is going to hold us accountable right alongside of them, right alongside Israel, and it will not be to the benefit of Israel, the United States, and quite frankly, the world. And the thing is that we know this, we can see it. There's evidence, ample evidence. And again, not just from me, not just from one American that was there. And I share these stories with you, not as someone that read the newspaper or read an article and applied some kind of opine or opinion to it. I was there on the ground, seeing it with my own eyes, witnessing it firsthand. So, but even beyond that, if you can't take my word for it, the evidence of many, to include Israeli Defense Force soldiers, IDF soldiers that in the last week have come forth to confirm many of the things that I have said. So what I would ask is that let's look at the truth and let's take an honest assessment of our position in the world right now and choose the right path, because if we do not, we will be on the wrong side of history as a nation. And that's something that I don't want. And I'm sure that's something that no one here wants.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I just want to ask whether Helga, you or Ray McGovern, who again, just so Mr. Aguilar is clear, Ray is a co-founder of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Also on with us, not yet, has not spoken, but he's there, Bill Binney from the National Security Agency, who found himself very much in your position back in the day. And we'll be hearing from him later. So Helga, is there anything you'd like to ask or add or say at this point?
No, I just want to thank you, because, it is always honest patriots who step forward, who, make sure that there is a future honor for your country. So I just want to thank you for what you are doing.
All right. Ray.
I just too want to join in the thanks. Colonel Aguilar is the epitome of what an Army officer used to be. I too was an Army officer, infantry and intelligence. I only served for 2 years because that was required and because I volunteered to do that. But Colonel Aguilar, you strengthen my hope that people coming out of West Point are not all like Westmoreland in Vietnam, not all like Petraeus in the Middle East, not all like McChrystal, or all those guys that bubble up to the top. You're the real deal, okay? I just like to pick out one thing here: dehumanization, okay? Getting back to the dropping of those bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we knew we had broken the Japanese code. We knew that they would surrender. All they wanted was some kind of reassurance that they could keep their damn emperor, that we wouldn't string them up from the nearest lamp pole. We knew that from breaking their code. So did Eisenhower, so did MacArthur, so did Admiral Halsey. And they all pleaded with President Truman, please don't do this. You don't have to do this. Yep. Okay. We know that from the records. Okay. Why did Truman do it anyway? dehumanization. I'm old enough to have been alive during all of World War II. I know what the Japs, all this stuff, all right? Okay, well, who was his Secretary of State? What was a fellow named Jimmy Burns? Jimmy Burns, where did he come from? He come from South Carolina. Where did Westmoreland come? Well, he come from South Carolina. Where does Senator, what's his name, Graham, where you come? You're from South Carolina. What are they like in South Carolina? Well, we know what they're like. They're racists. So racism plays a huge role in this. If the Palestinians look more like Ukrainians, it would be much more difficult to dehumanize them. So let's fess up, okay? We are a great country. I am just so proud to be an American, but I have to recognize our heritage, and it's genocide. First, the Native Americans. Then we tried all kinds of, like the Moros in southern Philippines. We couldn't exterminate them. It was genocide through and through. And now we're supporting for the first time a Israeli leader who is doing not only genocide, but forced starvation. So please keep going, because Colonel Aguilar, what's important here is that the mainstream media is performing just as it always does, covering all this stuff up and supporting the worst kind of instincts on the part of Trump, who, I will say one more time, is, in my view, being blackmailed by the Epstein tapes, okay? So we have to speak out, and your voice is so important. I congratulate you for having not only the courage, but the devotion to duty, okay? You didn't mention one other thing, and that is all these codifications. We also had the Uniform Code of Military Justice that you and I had to memorize. Thank you very much for being a faithful soldier.
And I'll just indicate, Colonel Aguilar, you can of course respond first, but I think you're going to be able to stay with us for a while. So there'll be other people asking if they can give questions. We're not going to do that right now, but please respond. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, the dehumanization aspect is something that I think is it's something that I have seen time and time again. And this was, I remember as a young lieutenant, as we were going into Iraq, the post-invasion counterinsurgency world was new to America in terms of conventional war transitioning into a counterinsurgency type war with long duration of staying in that nation, and it's something that the United States as an army was not prepared for. Not saying that the United States hadn't experienced it in other places before, Vietnam, Moro Philippines, other places, etc. But at this scale, in terms of a conventional fight transitioning into a counterinsurgency fight, to where the conventional army was a player in it, the dehumanization aspect.
I think his internet is frozen.
Soldiers. The names and things that we give to our enemy, or to just the population, and we've all heard these horrible things that I'll say them only to say that these aren't my beliefs, but the things that have been said. Like in Iraq, we call them ragheads, or in the Philippines, calling the Filipinos, calling them flips, and things like that you hear. Just this dehumanization not only comes through how we act, but our language and what we say to, and what we call people, and how that conveys it. Same thing in Gaza. The UG Solutions personnel on the ground, who by the way, the contract leader, the guy in charge of the contract, is a high-ranking officer in the Infidels Motorcycle Club that claimed to have the downfall of all Arabs and all Muslims. He's the guy in charge of the security contract, and the guy that wears a tattoo that says infidel. And they call the Palestinians, they call them the zombies. They call them the shitheads. They call them just horrible names, and all of that is part of the dehumanization. You don't refer to them as human beings, you refer to them as some name that dehumanizes them. Then it's easier to not see them as a human. And then when they're crawling around on the ground trying to pick up food to survive, and they're subservient to you, and you have all the power. That's another step of dehumanization. When you lie about their plight, when you lie about their struggle, oh, they're not starving, oh, they're fine, you dehumanize them further. And what's really sad and striking to me is that dehumanization is not just coming from the uneducated and the ignorant. That dehumanization is coming from, like Ambassador Huckabee. There's no starvation. It's like, come on, like American people aren't dumb. We can see it. Or what was striking is that, Ambassador Huckabee and Mr. Witkoff went to go visit one of the sites in Gaza recently, and parts that were cut out of the mainstream media that I saw, the video that was shot, is that, they're saying, oh, the IDF aren't shooting at the civilians. During their visit, just outside the site, you can just hear constant machine gun fire. It's like, okay, well then somebody's shooting somebody. So it's just the blatant lies in the face of the truth, to me, is concerning. And what changes that is the American people speaking up and saying, we won't tolerate that. But to the dehumanization aspect, yes, that's you and I, sir. We've seen that. We've seen that in conflict. We've seen that in places around the world, and that is often approached by an enemy upon another. That to dehumanize the population, because then it makes it more palatable to oppress them.
Okay, we want to thank you very, very much for this. And I know you're going to be able to stay with us.
Yep, I'll be staying. Yes, sir.
Very good, very good. So we're going to back to you, Dennis, so you can introduce a couple of people.
Good. Thank you very much, Anthony Aguilar and Ray McGovern and Helga, for that exchange. The dehumanization of the victims is extreme, as you say, but the dehumanizer is perhaps even more dehumanized by what he or she does in this process. And that's the real danger that we face, is that we as fellow Americans and people around the world tolerate this, because it destroys our very humanity and our ability to resolve these kinds of problems. Now, I wanted to just take note of the fact, one of the things that you mentioned, Anthony, this idea that Gaza is only damaging Israel in the long run. This policy is only going to lead to their own problems. It's of note, I think, that the policy of the tariffs is only going to damage the United States. So what's going on here? The confrontation with Russia, same type of thing. Our next speaker is Professor Steve Starr. He is, get the title absolutely correct, he's the former director of the Michigan University of Missouri Clinical Laboratory Science. He's an expert in issues of nuclear weapons. This is extremely germane to everyone. This week has seen, as has been mentioned, some very serious escalations in this regard. You may call it rhetoric only, but when the President of the United States talks about moving nuclear submarines closer to Russia, nuclear-capable submarines, the Russians read it for what it is. It's a threat, and they responded accordingly with comments about no longer abiding by the INF Treaty, which they don't have to since the United States pulled out, and also by announcing the serialized manufacture of Oreshnik missiles, and so on and so forth. So we're in that domain at this point. I urge everyone to pay very close attention to what our next speaker has to say. Steve, please go right ahead.
Hi, well, thank you for having me. I'd like to first say that I greatly admire Colonel Aguilar's bravery and integrity. I don't know if I'd have the same degree of courage that he's exhibited if I were in the same circumstance. And I want to say that I also agree with with Ray McGovern about the danger of the use of nuclear weapons in the Middle East with Israel. That's probably the greatest threat immediately facing us. But I also want to speak about the dangers of nuclear war with the United States and Russia, because we have, 90% or more of the nuclear weapons in the world, and they remain on launch-ready status. Can I share my screen with you all?
Sure. I think you can. Yeah.
Okay.
Right ahead.
Well, my contention is that we've already started World War III, that the Ukraine war has evolved into a hybrid form of World War III. And it's likely to continue and become nuclear unless we do something to stop it. And I hope all this talk of negotiations is a sign that there's a recognition of that. But my thought is that nuclear deterrence has been failing throughout the course of this war. Russia still remains under constant attack. The Ukraine war is a proxy war that the U.S. and NATO waged against Russia. We talk about Russia negotiating with Ukraine, but the truth is that the war would have ended in a few weeks after it started if the U.S. hadn't stepped in and torpedoed the talks that were about ready to stop the war in March of 2022. Since that time, Russian nuclear early warning radar systems and Russian strategic nuclear bombers have been attacked by drones multiple times. Now, this is unthinkable in the Cold War. We never saw anything like this. The idea that we would attack Russia or the early warning systems would never have happened because of nuclear deterrence. The idea that of mutual assured destruction. There was always a fear that we would have a massive nuclear war if we stepped over these red lines. But we see now that Germany's on the verge of providing Taurus missiles to Ukraine. Of course, they will be operated by German military and guided by U.S. targeting data. And I believe Russia would retaliate against Germany if this takes place. And so, of course, that would be Germany's a NATO member state. What's important, too, is we don't really see it in our news, but the Russian infrastructure is still under regular drone attacks. And these attacks require U.S. and/or U.K. targeting data. So Russia is under attack, and we've attacked its strategic nuclear weapons systems, and this is under Russian nuclear doctrine that would be grounds for nuclear retaliation. They haven't done it yet, but in 2024, the 3 early warning radar sites, Russia has 10 of them. This map shows where they're located. And one of the sites at least suffered very severe damage. Now, Russia relies on these sites to detect a nuclear attack. So this would be viewed by Russian war planners as possibly a preemptive, preparations for a nuclear first strike against Russia. In January of 2025, there was a massive drone attack on a fuel depot that the fuel that the Russian strategic bombers require to fly near the Engels Air Force Base. This is a photo of the fuel burning. Again, the U.S. and/or the UK supplied the targeting data for this, and probably the drones too. What would the U.S. do if Russia supplied drones and they were used to, to the Mexican cartels and they attacked U.S. missile bases or U.S. strategic bombers? In May of 2025, Putin was traveling to Kursk, and there was a massive drone attack that included an attack on his helicopter. Now, in order to do that, the U.S. and the UK had to supply the targeting data for the helicopter. What would the U.S. do if drones were used to try to kill Trump and they were supplied by Russia? And now, this is an image of Russian strategic bombers being attacked by drones. It was a massive attack. It was actually to be carried out against 5 Russian air bases. And under New START, the U.S. and Russia are required to keep their bombers out and open for monitoring purposes. So they used this. They used the Strategic Arms Treaty as a means to attack Russia. This greatly undermines the idea of arms control. And once again, U.S. and UK supplied the targeting data for these attacks. At least 3 or 4 bombers were destroyed. Now, throughout the war, drones have been striking Russian oil facilities and infrastructure, and it's knocked out a significant portion, at least say something like 15% of Russian refinery capabilities. This has continued. This video is one that was taken within the last 2 weeks. Imagine if you're a Russian looking out your window, you hear anti-aircraft fire. These are ongoing attacks on Russia that are being guided by U.S. targeting information. The war is continuing. And longer range drones are being employed. They're using AI. So we're not seeing this in the news, but the Russians are seeing it. Okay, what else is going on? Well, there's 51 new U.S. military bases in Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark that are being established right now. There's about an 830-mile border that Finland has with Russia. So on their border, they're seeing all these new bases. Will we put nuclear weapons there? Well, we just returned them to England. And another thing to remind you of that precipitated this crisis, the U.S. had moved ballistic missile defense Aegis Ashore systems to Romania and Poland before the war began. The Russians had called for the removal of these in their draft treaty proposals in 2021 that the U.S. just outright rejected. But these are facilities that use a Mark 41 vertical launch system that can be used to launch Tomahawk cruise missiles that can be nuclear armed. And the Russians have no way of knowing whether or not they're what type of missiles are loaded into the launchers. So what we see now is the U.S. has abrogated basically every arms control treaty that we've had, including the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And if New START is not renewed in February of next year, there will be thousands of nuclear weapons that will be redeployed, and they can be uploaded because, for example, our subs the Trident missiles can carry up to 12 warheads, but right now under New START, they're limited to 4 or 5. Well, there to be a massive redeployment of warheads. And as I mentioned, we've sent nuclear gravity bombs, the B-61 gravity bombs, to the UK in the last month. And so what does that tell Russia? Germany is poised to accept U.S. ground-launched intermediate-range ballistic missiles in 2026. Dr. Theodore Postel, who's a leading expert on this, has said that these missiles will be nuclear-armed. And he says that Russia will have only 6 to 8 minutes warning time before their warheads would detonate over Moscow. So what the Russians, we're back in the 1980s again, where we had Pershing missiles poised to hit Moscow. Well, in response, Russia has decided to deploy intermediate-range hypersonic arrestic missiles to Belarus within the next 5 months. Now, this is a video of the one use of arresting missiles. They come in at something like 10 to 12,000 miles per hour. The warheads have an explosive power. One missile has an explosive power of about 5 tons of TNT. The solid warhead penetrates the ground and then detonates far underground so it can destroy any command and control center or missile silo. No NATO headquarters or command center are safe from these. So if we get to the point where Russia uses conventional warheads carried by Areshniks, would the U.S. and NATO retaliate with nuclear weapons? So we've had recently, as was noted, President Trump threatened to move, he said, well, we're going to move our nuclear missile subs closer to Russia. Well, this was sort of downplayed because they said, well, missile subs are always out at sea. Well, they are, but if you move them closer to Russia, they can carry out a first strike in a few minutes. And this is an image of a missile being launched, a Trident D5 missile. We can launch, U.S. subs can launch these every 15 seconds. So they get in a position to fire, the missiles just come flying out. Now, each Trident II missile can carry 8 488 kiloton warheads or 12 90 kiloton warheads. As I mentioned before, they're limited to 3 or 4, but if New START is not renewed, then we will see, all these warheads piled back into the subs. So one sub can deliver 192 488 kiloton weapons to 288 90 kiloton weapons to the targets. This is a diagram that shows the depth of a crater with, you know, at our Capitol building there at the bottom of for scale. That's what one 488 kiloton warhead can do. And we have 14 of these subs that can launch these missiles. And this is a diagram from a 1992 technical evaluation of depressed trajectory submarine launched ballistic missiles. And if you look at the lower line, which is 7.2 minutes, that's how long it takes for a Trident II missile to deliver a warhead over 1,000 nautical miles. So if you put a Ohio-class sub out in the Barents Sea, 1,100 miles away from Moscow, 250, 300 miles off the coast, it can hit Moscow in 7 minutes. So this, when Trump announces that he's going to move Ohio-class subs closer to Russia, that's what Russian war planners think. And the U.S. still have 800, and Russia have 800 to 1,000 strategic nuclear warheads they can launch in 5 to 15 minutes. If we manage to take out all our with the first strike, we take out all the Russian ICBM silos, because our Trident II D5s missiles have super fuses on their warheads now that make them super accurate. The Russians will still have their Rushnik drone torpedo. And this is Dr. Postal again created this diagram. And this shows a 100 megaton warhead that's carried by this gigantic, this 26-meter torpedo that goes faster than U.S. torpedoes, so it can't be intercepted. It can go thousands of miles, and it can loiter off the coast. So the Belgorod subs carry 6 of these. This is an image of one of them. They are deployed now, and they can put these subs off the U.S. coast. And this is an image of what a 100 megaton bomb could do. This is actually a 58 megaton bomb that Russia detonated in 1961. So Dr. Postal created an image. One detonation like that will create a nuclear firestorm that covers an area of 6,000 to 7,000 square miles. So if you have 5 of these off the northeastern coast of the U.S., it just basically just annihilates everything. So I want to leave President Kennedy with the last words on this subject, because I don't want us to think that there's no hope.
Never have the nations of the world had so much to lose or so much to gain. Together we shall save our planet, or together we shall perish in its flames. Save it we can, and save it we must. And then shall we earn the eternal thanks of mankind, and as peacemakers, the eternal blessing of God.
Well, thank you for your attention. And I do believe that there's still a very good chance we can avoid nuclear war if people come to their senses.
Thank you very much, Professor Steve Starr. This makes it very clear why we all must mobilize around never again Hiroshima, Nagasaki, never again Gaza. And I think it points to the urgency not only of the Trump-Putin meeting, which is now clearly in sight, so much so that the British, the ever-loving British, are completely hysterical at the prospect. You'll read about this tomorrow in the EIR Daily News. I recommend that you subscribe to it, of course. But the British are completely apoplectic at the prospect of such a meeting. This also should underscore for people the urgency and the significance of Helga Zepp-LaRouche's call issued a couple of days ago for Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping to sit down together on September 3rd in China to address exactly these issues and the underlying economic issues, which are, of course, the fuse to these kinds of unbelievable dangers, and also the direction of the solution to the problems. That mentioned, let me now ask for Professor Eduardo Siqueira. He is a Brazilian researcher and analyst, Professor Emeritus of Public Health at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. Eduardo, you have the floor.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, fine.
Yes,
Thank you
you're
very
fine.
much for inviting me. It's the second time I participate, so I'm gonna try to summarize what's been going on with the B of the BRICS, which has been quiet for a while, but now it's hot again, as many others. As India, Brazil is now the new problem that Trump created with the so-called trade tariffs. The argument, I would start by saying that the argument about the tariffs initially said by the US government was to reduce trade deficits with many countries in the world, which assumedly were taking advantage of the US. This, unfortunately, is not the case with Brazil. This is one of the countries where the United States has actually the opposite of deficits. It has a surplus. So based on that rationale, there shouldn't be any reason whatsoever on trade issues for the United States to impose trade 50% tariffs on Brazil. Not that I agree with tariffs the way that's being proposed by the United States anyway, but on the basis of its own argument, it doesn't make any sense because this is one of the countries that does not have a trade deficit. So why is it that then Trump decided to do that? He told us that the reason why he was trying to do that was not really because of the economy or some supposedly deficits of Brazil. It was because Brazil was punishing, putting on trial, the former president of Brazil, who actually staged a coup, a military coup in Brazil recently, a couple of years ago. And because Trump does not agree with what Brazil is doing to sentence and punish those who were conspiring to overthrow the democratically elected president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, he said in no uncertain terms that the sanctions, the tariffs actually, were put in place because they did not agree what the Supreme Court of Brazil, especially the judiciary power of Brazil, was doing to correct, to bring to justice those who conspired to overthrow the government. So very clearly, what you see is a violation of sovereignty for a country that claims that Russia actually interfered with the US elections. And Trump clearly said, I'm going to interfere with Brazil, not only because of what you're trying to do based on your law, but I believe what's behind all that is that a step towards regime change, which ultimately is the strategy that the United States has been used in a number of different countries when the US government is not pleased with other countries, what other countries are doing. And Bolsonaro, the former ex-president in Brazil, has support within Brazil, and their supporters are actually conspiring, even in the United States. His son is in the United States, networking with members of the US administration to impose tariffs on Brazil. So based on that, the only conclusion we can get is that this is actually a network of the so-called extreme right, what I would call an international extreme right that's been organized where the United States feels like it did in Venezuela, like it's been doing in many other countries in South America, to consider that what happens in a country that is supposed to be under my purview, my domain, my yard, as we used to say, based on a wrong interpretation of the Monroe Doctrine that the countries in the South America and Central America should belong to the United States, is actually impose these policies. And of course, it has backfired. And on one way, Brazil is saying, we don't want to fight the United States. The United States has had a relationship with Brazil for over 200 years. Right or wrong, it's been peaceful relationships for over 200 years in terms of trade. And instead of having divisions, as probably was expected by Trump, what you're seeing is significant unity of the Brazilian people against these terrorists, and these I would call correctly, these are actually much more like sanctions, since the United States now revoked the visa of one of the Supreme judges of the Brazilian Supreme Court under the argument that this judge has become a dictator. In other words, not only interfered with the Supreme Court of Brazil, but he actually decides or tries to decide who should be given rights to come to the United States, which is absurd. Of course, it's not the first time this happened. We saw this in Venezuela very clearly. It continues to happen in many other countries. I'm not even talking about Cuba, who has been under blockade for decades. It seems that the United States has this idea that it can rule what happens in other countries when the United States administration is not happy with the results. It did this in Bolivia. It's now doing this in Argentina. So it seems to me that Brazil has become part of this process because of the BRICS. It's not only because of Brazil being a country as it is, important as it is, and Trump actually mentioned that the US is very interested in rare minerals, that Brazil has the second largest deposit of rare minerals after China. So it became clear that there are definitely interests. The other issue that's involved with that is that Brazil is trying to regulate the role of big tech companies in Brazil, because we have clear evidence that big tech companies do not want Brazil to have independence and laws that would regulate what they are supposed to do. And Trump claims that he's doing this because Brazil doesn't have free speech, or the government and the courts are trying to reduce free speech in Brazil. This is not the case at all. What the Brazilian government is arguing is that these companies have to be regulated as any other business has to be regulated when it infringes human rights in Brazil or infringes laws, constitutional laws in Brazil. And that has been the case. And Trump clearly says, we want this to go away. We want Brazil to deregulate or not regulate any possibility of telling these companies what they are not supposed to do. And we have very, very clear evidence that these companies have allowed people to organize violently. Fortunately, they were defeated to overthrow the government, including some generals, not only civilians, generals. And this was a long process that started years ago when there was what I would call a legislative coup, a lawfare that happened in Brazil. So long story short, what we're seeing is it is backfiring. Brazil is trying to negotiate so that the number of items affected by the tariffs is reduced. It has had some success on that, mostly because companies in the United States said they're not interested in having these tariffs, such as, for example, airplanes by Embraer. Many US aircraft companies import these airplanes, as well as orange juice, etc. But still, there are many items in the list that would clearly be harmed, would be a harm for Brazilians and for Brazilian companies. And what the government is trying to do is to figure out ways of compensating for the losses through some tax breaks and other ways of doing that, as well as the role that Lula has played internationally to discuss with other members of the BRICS, especially India, starting with India, but also Russia, China, figuring out a way for the BRICS to have a collective response to these tariffs. So in the context of our conversation today, I would say not only we shouldn't have nuclear wars, we should not have trade wars either, because based on the trade wars, that's where you end up having hot wars. That's what the experience we have in the last century. And now the game is a lot more complicated because they could be nuclear. But the basis of all that is the fact that the United States wants to be the sole power in the whole world and determine what happens to all countries in the global south without any consideration of the changes that have been happening towards multipolarity. And this is what has to happen. The dehumanization that you mentioned before is not only applied to what we are seeing in Israel, it's a dehumanization that happens in many countries in the world. And those of us in Brazil, and that's my generation, who had a coup that defeated civilian governments over 30 years ago, 50 years ago, clearly know that the United States has done in the past. And that's why, as was mentioned before by Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar, the perception about the United States is definitely becoming much more negative in a country that has tremendous influence from the United States. And lots of Brazilians love the United States. But with this kind of conduct by the presidents, by administrations, you go back to the time when we actually didn't like at all the United States because of what we suffered. 50 years of dictatorship that the United States supported. And that's what we're seeing today. The Brazilians becoming very, very anti-United States, uniting the country for alternatives for trade. And I believe this is probably what will continue to happen until such a time where the United States treats Brazil with respect and other countries in the global south as partners, not enemies, not adversaries, not people who are trying to cheat or create any security problems for the United States. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let me just make sure that we've still got Ray. Oh, there's Ray. Very good. So we go now to our next section here. Some of you are aware that there's a white paper that has been published, which has been investigating and evaluating what's going on around Russiagate. Ray McGovern has spent quite a bit of time looking at that, but we've brought a couple of his associates with him. He doesn't know that we have brought their associates with him. He would think of them as independent sovereign actors, which they certainly are. And I'm partially joking because I've been dealing with these gentlemen ever since 2017. I think November of 2017 was when Ray came, and Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe also, I believe. Yeah. And we were talking about Russiagate. Ray, I'd like you to set a little bit of context, but I'm going to bring up Bill Binney first, if he's there. I believe Bill's with us. Bill is a 32-year National Security Agency veteran, former technical director of the National Security Agency. And then Kirk Wiebe, retired analyst with the National Security Agency also. Both of them whistleblowers. But since, Ray, you just authored an article about this, co-authored, I guess, and you and Bill have been doing the rounds again on this matter. If you could just set the context, and then we'll go right to Bill. We've got him up there now. Great to see you now. So let Ray just say a couple things first, and then we'll go right to Bill.
Okay. Oh, it's good to see my friend Bill there.
Right.
Let me just introduce this by saying that when we set up Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity before the war of aggression against Iraq, okay, January 2003, and told the President Bush, that there were no weapons of mass destruction there, and there were no ties between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein. Well, when we set up the group, just by way of saying, all kinds of wonderful people came to join us. People who also were devoted to truth and justice. You know, it didn't seem sort of trite in those days. So among those were two former technical directors of NSA, Bill Binney and Ed Loomis, and Kirk Wiebe, who was about as senior as you can get in the experimental group that Bill can talk about. Now, the first thing that came up in the agenda was, whoa, what about this Russian hacking? Long story short, and Bill can talk to this, we said, Bill and Ed and Kirk, I mean, you know about Russia, you know about hacking, right? You created the systems in NSA and now Ed Snowden has these charts that show where the trace routes are and all that stuff. And so could you look into this to see if this is real? And they did. And on December 12th, 2016, before even Trump took office, they issued a memo which said, A, there is absolutely no reason to believe the Russians or anyone else hacked into the DNC, and here are the reasons why. And here in layman's terms is the difference between a hack and a copy from a computer onto a thumb drive. Bill, can you take it from there?
Sure. Basically, we're looking at a couple of sets of data. The Gooseford 2 data that came out in different batches, and then the published data by WikiLeaks of the DNC data. Now, that if you look at it from our forensics point of view, all of the data that WikiLeaks published came from a physical download to a storage device, a thumb drive or something of that nature. This is provable in a court of law. And saying that the WikiLeaks data published was hacked by the Russians is a provable lie. Okay, it's a straight out lie. And it was concocted by, we'll get into that when you go to the Gooseford 2 data. Now, the Gooseford 2 data came out in 2 batches too. Well, actually a smidgen earlier, in the 15th of June, Gooseford 2 leaked some that had Russian fingerprints. Now, there were several aspects about what that data involved. The 2 batches that he published on the net, which was his mistake. Well, I say his, but it's not his. It's a group of people. And the problem there was that if you looked only at the millisecond, the 2 batches merged without conflict at the millisecond level to form one continuous file. That told you right away that Gooseford 2 did one download, split it into 2 parts, and did a range change on the hour and the day on one file and left the other file the way it was and claimed he had 2 leaks. Well, the point is there was only one. The guy's lying. It was a manipulation of data. The guy's a fake. Right. And so then we looked at the stuff that was published earlier in 15th of June, where the fingerprints were there. And then a couple of our compatriots in England that were helping us look at this data found 5 of those files that they claimed had fingerprints of Russians in it. In the Gooseford 2 data had no Russian fingerprints in the published data in WikiLeaks. So that meant somebody inserted them. Okay. And then when the Vault 7 material came out, it said, hey, there's this CIA has this program. That was the leak of all the CIA programs to penetrate firewalls, operating systems, stuff like that. CIA had this program that which enabled them to hack into somebody and make it look like somebody else did it. And the people they made it look like were the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Arabs, and the Farsi, or the Iranians. So, and then in Vault 7, I think somewhere it said, oh yeah, this program was used once in 2016. Was that the 15th of June? Yes. So what that tells me, very simply, is all the evidence we have about Gooseford 2 is it's a creation of CIA. And that they, in fact, created that, and they put the plants in, and they tried to influence the intelligence community through that, and tried to also get, people tried in court of law. I mean, the Internet Research Agency out of St. Petersburg in Russia was accused of being a troll for the Russian government. And they challenged that in a court of law. They came into, and this was the Department of Justice's claim who did it, and then who influenced everything. So they challenged it in a court of law, and the government couldn't prove anything. And so they were ordered by the judge to never repeat anything about the Internet Research Agency being a troll of the Russian government. They were ordered by the court because they lost in court. Why? Because it's a manufactured thing. They also published a list of in the accusations. They also published a list of events that showed that they were monitoring some hacking internally in the system. Well, the only in my mind, the only system that has that is NSA. I mean, they have the ability to do that. So when they have that, it's classified. And if they put that out as NSA data, claiming or implying it was, they're exposing classified material and violating the law of not exposing. They should go for treason, right? Or espionage, or like they're charging whistleblowers, right? But I mean, the other thing that was obvious to us right from the very beginning was that in the Gooseford 2 data was that the download speeds were just too fast for the internet anywhere in the world to take it, even inside the United States. It was just not possible. I mean, we had it going at 49.1 megabytes, that's characters, 49.1 million characters per second. I'm sorry, that doesn't go anywhere, okay? the fastest we could get, and we had people in the VIPs who thought it could, and so we tried it. We got people in Europe to try it with people here in the US. We put out a data set. They said, pull it across, see how fast you can get it across. The fastest we could get was 1/4 that speed, about 12 megabytes per second, between data centers, one in New Jersey and one in England. So to us, that meant this could not have been an international hack. It couldn't have been a hack even inside the United States. So it couldn't be a hack. It had to be a down because the speeds were compatible with downloading to a storage device like a thumb drive. So all of that proved to us that the CIA was a part of this conspiracy to accuse the sitting president or the incumbent president and then the sitting president of being involved with the Russians. And that was an outright provable lie.
Okay.
And
go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say, and please be aware that we proved that in December of 2016. Later on, we had still more data reflecting the download speed, showing that it could not possibly have been hacked. And then, you know, if more proof were needed, now get this, folks, this is on the final exam, okay? On the 5th of December, 2017, okay, the head of CrowdStrike, the cyber firm to whom James Comey in his wisdom deferred to do the forensics on that hack, in quotes, of the DNC, had to testify under oath. And their chief, Sean Henry, when he was asked by Adam Schiff, so can you tell us how the Russians hacked those emails? He was about to answer. He said, well, then his lawyer grabbed him. Oh, I'm under oath. Okay. There was no hack. There is no technical evidence of any exfiltration. And so, yeah, that's the way it was. Well, that was December 5th, 2017, folks. Do you know about that? No, you don't. Why? Because Adam Schiff hid it for 2.5 years. And then since then, when it was released by Adam Schiff, no major media outfit has reported on it. So you have, do the math, December 5th, 2017 until now, where 80% of the Americans still believe that the Russians hacked into the DNC emails, when you have court testimony unreported by the New York Times or the Washington Post showing that that the head of the cyber firm said, no, nothing was exfiltrated, not by the Russians, not by anybody else. And so there you have it. You know, that's one last thing that I would add. Bill, you probably want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I need to add one more thing, Ray, and it has to do with the CrowdStrike and their examination of the servers. I'm sure they were going in and because they said that it was prepared for exfiltration, but they didn't see it exfiltrated.
Right.
So, but that meant that the FAT file format that was used to transfer the data, which is why we know it was downloaded to a storage device, also changed the last modified times inside the DNC server. So all those last modified times were there. That showed the property. That program only has a resolution of 2 seconds. So that means every time they change the time, it ends in an even second. Okay, and it goes from 2 to 4 to 6 to 8 and so on. You know, so that was what they saw there. But the more important thing is they didn't say anything about checking to see if anybody had a copy command in there on the network log, which is recorded there. Yeah, I mean, all these things are recorded in the network log. All they had to do was say, look for a copy command coming on the network log, and who was it, and where did they, and when did they do it, you know? So that would have given them an internal download to a storage device of that data. Did they do that? Or did anybody ask that? No. I mean, this is just incompetence at its clearest. I mean, come on. This is simple forensics.
Well, let me point out that, and I don't know whether we can bring this up on this as a visual, but in the chat, we are going to put a connection to the white paper, which was just put out by Executive Intelligence Review, and I guess also in the LaRouche organization, Worse Than Treason, the actual motive behind Russiagate. Of course, there's been an emphasis on the role. Oh, be able to show the cover? That would be nice if we can do that. Okay, fine. So this is available now. It's really the first of several, but you'll see there exposing the real origins of Russiagate, the British Empire's long war against Russia. Britain drives toward war with Russia, brings France and Germany along, and then the Russiagate timeline, which includes part of what you just heard, though this is now an addition. And then a final section, the war party is an obscenity, Britain's royal hoofprint on Epstein and Russiagate, which I haven't. So that's there. So Kirk Wiebe, who was worked together with Bill Binney on these matters, you're with us. Any comment you'd like to make at this point? Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right. Good day to everyone, the audience. A special hello to my friends Ray McGovern, Bill Binney, and to you, Dennis. I would like to make several comments. First of all, let's go back to what Ray McGovern said earlier about the status of relations and discussions between Trump and Putin. Ray is spot on. When you look at the language used by Ushakov and others, what Putin's trying to do is signal to Trump that he's willing to talk. This is the moment to seize, for sure. And the Russians choose their words very carefully, I have to tell you. So this is no mistake, no misspeaking going on. It's very methodical and purposeful. Number two, on Bill Binney and his work on the analysis of the Seth Rich operation and also the supposed interpretation that the Russians hacked the DNC server. Excellent analysis by Bill and the team that looked at that. Just marvelous, and it's rock solid. There's no holes in that analysis or conclusion. Here's the kicker. Bill was invited by Pompeo to go to the CIA and talk to him personally about this matter. And that happened in 2017. Bill can tell you a little more. I think it was around October, might have been September. But I remember Bill leaving from Amsterdam, where we were working in a business venture at the time. So here's Pompeo, contacts Bill Binney in Amsterdam, says, hey, come talk to me about this. And Bill did. Pompeo did nothing. Nothing. And that, in my book, is very, very telling. The other thing I'd like to add is that the weaponization of government, and I'm going to focus on the part I know best, and that's NSA's excursion into the business of surveilling Americans, which ultimately led to the ability to surveil Trump. And I would say they did this with some complicitness on the part of GCHQ, the British intel operation. It was not done in isolation. And you might ask, why get the British involved? Well, it's simple. NSA is forbidden to monitor American citizens without a court order, without permission. In other words, proper suspicion of guilt of some corruption or crime. But the British have no such law regarding Americans. Americans are viewed as foreigners. So they were free to assist in this operation. There's a lot of information about the director of GCHQ named Hannigan at the time. his involvement, some communication between the Obama administration and him about doing this collaborative effort, let's put it that way. So I think we're going to hear more and more as this information, this trough of information that's coming out, comes out even more. But the weaponization that was used and has been used for the last 20, I would say 24 years, began under Hayden, General Michael Hayden, who went on ultimately to become the deputy DNI and the director of CIA. It began under him, and it's only growing stronger. Not Congress, not the president, no one has put safeguards on what NSA is doing. And the latest information is that the company responsible for the largest part of government surveillance of Americans, the company's called Palantir. Peter Thiel was a recent CEO. I'm not sure that he is anymore, but the point of it is, recent negotiations with Palantir have led to an agreement with the DNI and the United States government to do massive purchasing of data from those who give us our applications on our personal digital communications devices, tablets, telephones, those little icons on your screen, any personal data gathered by the companies that make these. You've pretty much signed up to accept the condition that they are able to harvest your information and sell it. Yeah. So Palantir has been given a budget to buy up massive amounts of this data with no known constraints. Now, let me tell you, this is leading and will lead to the largest surveillance weapon ever devised by mankind. When combined with data already in the databases of NSA and the intelligence community, and then add AI and the ability to process it and find relationships in that data, will be also on steroids. And all of this with no constitutional protections built into the system. Let me repeat that. There are no known constitutional protections built into the system. So if Russiagate was any measure of concern by people being controlled by the government, or the government's ability to alter typical normal democratic behavior like the election of a president, if it can do that already, imagine what it can do with this new monstrous, I'm going to call it, capability, totally unbridled. And the only constraint on it is the obligation of the intelligence community to brief Congress, a select subcommittee of Congress, not everybody, on the state of its affairs. And they don't have any requirement to prove anything, demonstrate anything. It's all done on a wink and a shake of the hand. If there's anything to be concerned about, it is this unbridled surveillance monster that is being built as we speak. And with that, Dennis, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Kirk. Yeah, here's what we're gonna do, everybody. We're gonna transition in a moment to questions and answers. I want to first ask Helga if she has anything that she is hearing all of what has been said to respond before we go to that Q&A section.
Yes, I mean, this is a a very wide field of topics which all would deserve in-depth discussion. I just want to mention one thing concerning Palantir, that their AI programs, their software has been used in targeting some of the Palestinians. I think that's a whole other chapter to be investigated, because, I mean, talking about dehumanization, when machines give order about killing people using programs to lure them on the basis of offering food and then luring them out of the houses to shoot them, I mean, as I said, there's no time now to go into the depths of it. I fully agree with you, Kirk, about the danger of this, because if there is no awareness, people are defenseless against it. I can only say that there is a common thread in all the different topics which have been used, and that is the dehumanization of what people call the enemy. I mean, that started with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was the basis for Churchill's Operation Unthinkable, which ended a fruitful cooperation between the Soviet Union and the United States in defeating Nazism, opening the Cold War. This is what was the basis of all these interventionist wars. If you think about the millions of people who have died as a consequence of lies, like the Iraq War based on lies, Afghanistan, Libya, it's a long, long list. And I think one can not try to remedy all of these situations one by one. It's in any case the past. But I think what it requires is an urgent change of the image of man, because it starts always that if you think that only some people are human and others are not, that's not only the basis of colonialism, racism, imperialism, all of these things, but it goes against the very nature of man, because we are supposedly and hopefully, and I fully believe that we are the only species capable of creative reason. And when you deny that ability of creative reason of some other human beings, then you're destroying your own humanity as much as you deny the rights to this other person or group of people. And I think we have reached in the history of mankind the point where we must redefine that every human being on the planet is as human as we are, and that we have to really start to reordering a new security and development architecture, which starts with the idea of the image of man, that, basically man is good by nature and all evil is the result of a lack of development and can be overcome by development. And if you start with that image of man, everything else falls into place. And I think, I really would urge that we do discuss these matters, because, with all the many problems mentioned, you have to agree on principle if you want to find a solution.
Okay, thank you very much, Helga. Ray, I see you have your hand raised, but I would like to ask you to hold that thought for a minute, because we are going to, at this point, transition to the Q&A part, the open discussion part of this program. Those of you who are listening on Zoom and who are listening, on YouTube and other streaming services, if you want to participate live in this discussion, you can do so by going to the schillerinstitute.org site and register for this Zoom session immediately and get on and participate in the next 40 minutes or so of discussion that we'll have. We value this discussion and exchange with people participating greatly, and we want to leave time to be able to do that. So we urge you to do that. We'll start the Q&A session as soon as I'm advised by Dave that the streaming has been stopped.
Can I